Racist cops beat up an elderly black man in broad daylight, thinking no one will stop them. The brutal officers laugh as they pummel the 75-year-old veteran with batons, calling him names while he bleeds on the concrete. But the humble janitor, watching from across the street, isn't just another bystander. This is Jackie Chan himself. The racist thugs have no idea they just assaulted a war hero in front of a man who spent decades protecting the innocent with lightning-fast martial arts. While the corrupt cops continue their savage beating, the legendary fighter approaches with deadly calm, his janitor's uniform hiding 5 decades of bone-crushing expertise. The elderly veteran recognizes his unlikely savior and feels hope for the first time since the nightmare began. The officers keep swinging their weapons, thinking they're untouchable behind their badges, but they're actually about to face a master who turns everyday objects into instruments of justice. What happens when dirty cops pick the wrong fight on the wrong street? Will these racist bullies survive learning why some heroes work in the shadows? What happened next would terrorize these corrupt officers for the rest of their miserable careers. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Riverside Avenue as Walter Jenkins adjusted his Navy veteran cap and checked his watch. 6:30 a.m. sharp. 75 years of discipline meant he never ran late, especially not for his weekly chess game with Eugene Porter at the Riverside Community Center. His pressed khakis held their crease despite the humid Detroit air, and his polished shoes clicked against the sidewalk with military precision. 3 blocks away, Jack Chan pushed his mop bucket across the marble lobby of the Meridian office building, his movements displaying an unconscious grace that seemed almost choreographed. At 60-something, the night janitor moved with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd spent a lifetime perfecting every gesture. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he noticed the elderly black gentleman in the veteran's cap, the same dignified man who passed by every Thursday morning like clockwork. Walter paused at Murphy's newsstand, exchanging pleasantries about the weather while purchasing his Detroit Free Press. "Another scorcher coming, Mr. Jenkins," Murphy called out as Walter folded the paper under his arm. The old veteran smiled, tipping his cap. "Nothing I haven't handled before, son." Jack finished securing the building's locks, his keychain catching the morning light. The simple Honda Civic in the parking lot waited patiently, as modest and reliable as its owner. He'd learned long ago that the most important work often went unnoticed, a philosophy that had served him well in his current life of quiet anonymity. As Walter continued down Riverside Avenue, his gait steady despite his age, Jack loaded his cleaning supplies into the trunk. The veteran moved with purpose, shoulders squared, every step a testament to decades of service and sacrifice. Jack started his engine, the gentle hum mixing with the awakening sounds of the city. Neither man knew that in 15 minutes, their carefully ordered worlds would collide with explosive consequences. Walter checked his watch again, 7:15 a.m. Right on schedule. Jack pulled out of the parking lot, following the same route that had become second nature. The morning felt like any other, carrying no hint of the storm about to break over this quiet corner of Detroit. Both men breathed the same air, walked the same streets, lived by the same code of quiet dignity. Soon, that shared humanity would bind them together in ways neither could imagine. Walter had just crossed at Riverside and 5th Street when the patrol car pulled alongside him with deliberate slowness. The white Crown Victoria bore the scratches and dents of hard city use, its occupants studying him through tinted windows before the doors swung open in unison. Officer Bradley Kowalski emerged first, 35 years old with a crew cut that revealed the aggressive set of his jaw. His partner, Dennis Murphy, followed reluctantly, 28 and clearly uncomfortable as his eyes darted between Kowalski and the elderly pedestrian. "Hold up there, Pops," Kowalski called out, his voice carrying the authority he wore like armor. His hand rested casually on his utility belt, fingers drumming against the leather. Walter stopped respectfully, turning to face the officers with the same calm dignity he'd shown enemy fire in Vietnam. "Good morning, officers. How can I help you?" Kowalski's eyes narrowed. "Suspicious behavior. You match the description of someone who's been breaking into cars around here." The lie rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. "I'm afraid there's been a mistake," Walter replied, his voice steady. I'm walking to my weekly chess game at the community center. Same routine for 3 years now. He reached for his wallet. I have my membership card if you'd like to see it. Murphy shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the man's obvious respectability. Maybe we should. I'll decide what we should do. Kowalski snapped, never taking his eyes off Walter. Let's see some ID, and make it slow. 50 yards away, Jack's Honda had slowed to a crawl. Something about the officer's body language triggered alarm bells honed by decades of reading dangerous situations. He pulled to the curb, engine idling. Watching the interaction with growing concern, Walter produced his identification with careful movements, extending it toward Kowalski. Walter Jenkins, sir. Retired postal worker, Navy veteran. Kowalski barely glanced at the ID before his face twisted with irritation. You got an attitude problem, old man? I asked for identification, not your life story. His voice rose, attracting attention from across the street. And I want to know why you're demanding badge numbers and supervisors. The morning's peaceful rhythm shattered like glass as Kowalski stepped closer, his shadow falling across Walter's weathered face. The shove came without warning, Kowalski's palm striking Walter's chest with enough force to send the elderly veteran stumbling backward. The Detroit Free Press scattered across the pavement as Walter's arms windmilled for balance, his polished shoes scraping against concrete. Officer, please, Walter said, raising his hands in a gesture of peace, his Navy training keeping his voice level despite the adrenaline flooding his system. I'm a veteran. I mean no trouble. The word veteran seemed to enrage Kowalski further. I don't care if you're General Patton, he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. His baton appeared in his hand like a magic trick, the black polymer gleaming in the morning sun. You people think you're entitled to special treatment. Walter tried to back away, but Murphy had moved behind him, blocking any escape route. The younger officer's face showed conflict, but he stayed in position as his partner raised the weapon. He's reaching for something, Murphy shouted, though Walter's hands remained clearly visible and empty. The first blow caught Walter across the shoulders, driving him to one knee on the unforgiving sidewalk. He tried to protect himself with raised arms, but Kowalski's baton found its mark again and again, shoulders, back, ribs. Each strike was accompanied by grunted curses and accusations of resistance. Murphy joined in with vicious kicks to Walter's torso, swept up in the violence his partner had unleashed. Walter's veteran cap tumbled away, his reading glasses shattering against the concrete. Blood began to flow from a cut above his eye, staining his pressed shirt. The old soldier curled into a protective ball, his military training telling him to minimize the target area, to survive until the assault ended. But this wasn't combat. This was execution by degrees, delivered by men sworn to protect and serve. Across the street, Jack's hands gripped his steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He watched a decorated veteran, a man who'd served his country with honor, being brutalized by the very people meant to protect him. Other pedestrians stopped and stared, some fumbling for cell phones, but no one moved to intervene. Walter's cries of pain carried across the morning air, each sound hitting Jack like a physical blow. The car engine continued its gentle idle as Jack made the choice that would change everything. He turned off the ignition and stepped into the street. Jack approached the scene with deliberate calm, his hands clearly visible and unthreatening. The janitor's uniform made him appear harmless, just another working man in navy blue, concerned about a disturbance on his route home. His footsteps were measured, purposeful, carrying no hint of the deadly skills concealed beneath his humble exterior. "Excuse me, officers," he said in his accented English, voice soft enough that both men had to strain to hear him. "I think there's been a mistake." Kowalski spun around, baton still dripping with Walter's blood, his face flushed with exertion and rage. The sight of the Asian man seemed to channel his fury into a new direction. "Get back, Chinaman, or you'll get the same treatment as your friend here." Jack knelt beside Walter, whose breathing came in short, pained gasps. Blood pooled beneath the old veteran's face, his dignity stripped away by the savage beating. Jack's fingers found Walter's pulse, weak but steady, and he whispered words of comfort. "Hang on, friend. Help is coming." Murphy's voice cracked as he spoke into his radio, requesting backup for multiple suspects resisting arrest. His hands shook as he tried to process what had just happened, how a routine stop had spiraled into this nightmare. Jack rose slowly, his movements fluid despite the tension crackling in the air. "This man needs medical attention," he said with remarkable composure. "I call ambulance now." The suggestion seemed to snap something inside Kowalski. His baton whistled through the air toward Jack's skull, a blow meant to silence the witness permanently. But Jack wasn't there anymore. The movement was so subtle it seemed almost accidental. A slight lean, a step to the side, and suddenly Kowalski was stumbling forward, his momentum carrying him past his target. The baton struck only empty air. "Please," Jack continued, as if nothing had happened, "I don't want trouble. Only help injured man." Murphy drew his service weapon with trembling hands, the morning sun reflecting off the barrel. "Step away from the suspect." "Now," Jack raised his hands but remained beside Walter, a human shield between the broken veteran and further violence. A small crowd had gathered across the street, cell phones capturing every moment, but still no one approached. Kowalski regained his balance, his face now purple with humiliation and rage. "Last warning, Jackie Chan." The racist taunt hung in the air as Jack shifted almost imperceptibly, his weight settling onto the balls of his feet. His voice remained steady, but something had changed in his posture, a subtle readiness that only a martial arts master would recognize. "Okay," Jack said quietly, his eyes never leaving the officers. "But first, you stop hurting old man." Kowalski charged like a bull, baton raised high above his head, a primal scream tearing from his throat. But Jack moved like water around stone, ducking under the wild swing with fluid grace, pivoting on one foot as the weapon whistled harmlessly overhead. His response was poetry in motion. A gentle palm strike to Kowalski's wrist sent the baton spinning across the pavement, clattering against a fire hydrant 30 feet away. The officer's momentum carried him forward into empty space, arms flailing as he fought for balance at Murphy's taser cracked to life, twin wires seeking their target. But Jack was already moving, rolling behind a parked sedan as electricity sparked against the car door. He emerged on the opposite side, still speaking with impossible calm. "Please, officers, I don't want to fight. Just help injured man." Yet his movements told a different story entirely. Every step was precise, economical, flowing from one position to another with unconscious grace. When Murphy lunged forward attempting a tackle, Jack used the younger officer's momentum against him, guiding him into a pile of trash bags where he landed with a soft thud, unhurt but thoroughly confused. Kowalski drew his service weapon, screaming obscenities that echoed off the surrounding buildings. "Now you've done it, you foreign piece of..." Jack's eyes swept the construction site. Nearby, scaffolding pipes gleaming in the morning sun, a bucket of tools, scattered building materials. His mind calculated distances and angles like a chess master planning moves ahead. Murphy scrambled to his feet, drawing his own weapon with shaking hands. Both barrels now pointed at Jack, who stood with hands raised but weight balanced perfectly. On his feet, Walter groaned weakly, trying to push himself upright. Blood ran down his weathered face, but consciousness flickered in his eyes. "Don't," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Don't hurt him." The words revealed what the officers hadn't yet grasped, that Jack knew the victim's name, that this wasn't a random intervention by a concerned citizen. The crowd across the street pressed closer, phones recording every moment as tension reached its breaking point. "I surrender," Jack said quietly. "But first, someone call ambulance for Walter." "How do you know his name?" Kowalski demanded, finger tight on his trigger, sweat beading on his forehead despite the morning chill. Jack didn't answer. Instead, he exploded into motion that defied both his age and humble appearance. Using the construction scaffolding like a gymnast's apparatus, he vaulted up and over both officers, landing silently behind them before they could react. His hands found a mop bucket and its metal lid, wielding them like ancient shield and sword as the officers spun to face him. Murphy fired wildly, the crack of gunfire splitting the morning air. The bullet sparked off the building wall, sending concrete chips flying. Jack deflected the officer's follow-up swing with the bucket lid, the impact ringing like a bell. then swept Murphy's feet with the mop handle. The young officer went down, hard but rolled safely away from further harm. Kowalski's gun barked twice, bullets ricocheting off metal scaffolding in showers of sparks. But Jack moved like a dancer partnered with the construction site itself, swinging from pipes, ricocheting off walls, turning the environment into both weapon and protection. That a paint roller on an extension pole became a staff, allowing him to disarm Kowalski from a safe distance. The service weapon skittered across the pavement, coming to rest beneath a parked truck. Hand-to-hand combat erupted as both officers rushed him simultaneously. But it was no contest. Jack's signature style emerged in all its glory, using their aggression against them, turning their attacks into pratfalls, neutralizing them completely without throwing a single hard punch. Murphy lunged for his fallen weapon. Jack kicked a paint can that rolled between the officer's feet, sending him sprawling in a tangle of limbs. Kowalski attempted a rear chokehold, but Jack ducked low and suddenly the officer found himself embracing a metal support beam instead. Within 90 seconds, both officers sat dazed on the sidewalk, their weapons scattered, their dignity shattered. Neither was seriously injured, but their capacity for violence had been completely neutralized. Jack immediately returned to Walter's side, using his own jacket to pillow the veteran's bloodied head. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air as the crowd across the street erupted in spontaneous applause. The ambulance arrived first, its red and white bulk blocking traffic as paramedics Larry Hoffman and Sandra Kim rushed toward the scene. 3 patrol cars followed in quick succession, their occupants emerging to find a surreal tableau. 2 officers sitting stunned on the pavement, construction materials scattered like toys, and a modest Asian janitor kneeling beside an elderly black man whose blood stained the concrete. Captain Rita Donnelly stepped out of the lead vehicle, her practiced eyes taking in the scene with the efficiency of 20 years on the force. She surveyed the evidence. The officers' weapons scattered across the pavement, cell phone videos being uploaded in real time, and the impossible sight of Kowalski and Murphy looking like they'd been put through a blender. What the hell happened here? She demanded. Kowalski struggled to his feet, pointing an accusatory finger at Jack. That terrorist attacked us. He's got some kind of martial arts training. Ma'am, Jack interrupted gently, never taking his eyes off Walter as the paramedics worked. These officers were beating this man. I only tried to help. Donnelly's breath caught in her throat. She'd seen this face 100 times on movie screens, watching Jackie Chan films with her kids on weekend nights. The humble janitor's uniform couldn't disguise those distinctive features, that unmistakable voice. Mr. Chan? She asked quietly, stepping closer. Jack nodded with characteristic modesty. Just Jack, please. I work as janitor here. Paramedic Hoffman's voice cut through the tension. Victim has severe concussion, 3 broken ribs, internal bleeding. He needs surgery, but he'll make it. Walter's hand found Jack's, gripping it with surprising strength. Thank you, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the growing crowd. Word was spreading like wildfire through the gathering spectators. Jackie Chan. The Jackie Chan had just stopped police brutality in broad daylight. Phones captured every angle as the crowd swelled beyond the barriers patrol officers tried to establish. Donnelly faced an impossible choice. Arrest her officers for excessive force, arrest the international film star for interfering with police business, or find some middle ground that wouldn't destroy careers or create a media circus. She chose the bureaucratic solution. Everyone comes to the precinct for statements. As Walter was loaded into the ambulance, he insisted Jack ride along. The crowd parted reverently as the unlikely hero climbed into the vehicle, still wearing his janitor's uniform like a badge of honor. The sterile halls of Detroit Metropolitan Hospital buzzed with controlled chaos as Walter disappeared behind emergency room doors. Jack sat in the waiting area, his janitor's uniform drawing curious stares from staff and visitors who couldn't quite place his famous face in such mundane clothing. Monica Williams burst through the automatic doors 30 minutes later, her business suit wrinkled from the frantic drive across town. At 32, Walter's granddaughter carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd fought the legal system and won more often than not. Where is he? She demanded, her voice cracking with barely controlled emotion. Jack rose respectfully. Surgery. Doctors say he will recover. His accented English was gentle, comforting. Your grandfather is very strong, man. Monica's initial suspicion melted when Walter emerged from recovery 2 hours later, insisting on giving his statement immediately. His weathered face bore fresh bandages, but his eyes were clear and determined. This man saved my life, Walter said firmly, gripping Jack's hand. Those officers would have killed me if he hadn't stepped in. While Monica recorded Walter's statement on her phone for legal protection, Captain Donnelly appeared in the hospital cafeteria, her expression grave. She slid into the booth across from Jack, keeping her voice low. You need to understand what you're up against, she said. Chief Romano has been building his empire for years. He's got connections to white supremacist groups, protection from corrupt politicians, and a media machine that's already spinning this story. She showed Jack her phone screen. Romano's press conference was already trending. Foreign national attacks police officers. The counter-narrative was spreading faster than the truth. Outside agitators, anti-police terrorism, questions about Jack's immigration status despite his decades of American citizenship. He's calling you a dangerous individual with terrorist training, Donnelly continued. Federal charges are being prepared. This isn't just about one bad incident anymore. Monica returned with devastating news. Romano had appeared on 3 networks already, painting Walter as a career criminal and Jack as his accomplice. The video evidence was being dismissed as edited propaganda by anti-police activists. Jack stared at the hospital television where Romano's face filled the screen, his voice dripping with false sincerity as he spoke about heroic officers ambushed while performing their duties. The humble janitor finally understood the truth. This wasn't about justice or protecting the innocent. Romano had turned him from hero into hunted man, and the corrupt chief possessed resources Jack had never imagined. Jack checked into the Riverside Motel using cash, avoiding his apartment knowing Romano's people would be watching. The small room smelled of industrial disinfectant and old cigarettes, but it offered something invaluable: anonymity. He sat on the sagging bed, still wearing his janitor's uniform, trying to process how quickly his quiet life had unraveled. Monica arrived an hour later carrying Chinese takeout and a thick legal folder. You can't stay here, she said, scanning the dingy room. Romano has patrol cars circling every cheap motel in the city. She explained his predicament with clinical precision. Romano was painting him as a foreign threat, Walter as a criminal accomplice, framing the entire incident as an attack on law enforcement. Federal prosecutors were reviewing charges of assaulting police officers, interfering with official duties, and potential terrorism connections. I've arranged a safe house, Monica continued. My grandmother's place in Corktown. She's expecting us. Pearl Williams' modest brick home sat on a tree-lined street where neighbors still knew each other's names. At 78, Pearl moved, with the careful grace of someone who'd weathered decades of struggle and emerged stronger. She recognized Jack immediately from his films, treating him like family despite their brief acquaintance. Welcome, son, she said, ushering him inside. Any friend of Walter's is family here. Walter insisted on joining them despite his injuries, arriving from the hospital with strict instructions to rest. His arm was in a sling, bandages covered half his face, but his spirit remained unbroken. Pearl shared stories of fighting injustice in the 1960s, explaining how individual acts of courage inspired larger movements. Sometimes one person standing up is all it takes to remind others they can stand too. That evening, neighborhood children began gathering in Pearl's backyard after word spread that Jackie Chan was staying there. Jack found himself teaching basic self-defense moves to a dozen eager kids, their laughter echoing through the gathering dusk. You see, Pearl said, watching from her kitchen window, you're not just defending yourself anymore. You're showing them what's possible. Jack realized she was right. He couldn't be a passive defendant in Romano's narrative. He needed to actively fight the corruption that had turned him from hero into hunted man. Jack checked into the Riverside Motel using cash, avoiding his apartment knowing Romano's people would be watching. The small room smelled of industrial disinfectant and old cigarettes, but it offered something invaluable: anonymity. He sat on the sagging bed, still wearing his janitor's uniform, trying to process how quickly his quiet life had unraveled. Monica arrived an hour later carrying Chinese takeout and a thick legal folder. You can't stay here, she said, scanning the dingy room. Romano has patrol cars circling every cheap motel in the city. She explained his predicament with clinical precision. Romano was painting him as a foreign threat, Walter as a criminal accomplice, framing the entire incident as an attack on law enforcement. Federal prosecutors were reviewing charges of assaulting police officers, interfering with official duties, and potential terrorism connections. I've arranged a safe house, Monica continued. My grandmother's place in Corktown. She's expecting us. Pearl Williams' modest brick home sat on a tree-lined street where neighbors still knew each other's names. At 78, Pearl moved, with the careful grace of someone who'd weathered decades of struggle and emerged stronger. She recognized Jack immediately from his films, treating him like family despite their brief acquaintance. "Welcome, son," she said, ushering him inside. "Any friend of Walter's is family here." Walter insisted on joining them despite his injuries, arriving from the hospital with strict instructions to rest. His arm was in a sling, bandages covered half his face, but his spirit remained unbroken. Pearl shared stories of fighting injustice in the 1960s, explaining how individual acts of courage inspired larger movements. Sometimes one person standing up is all it takes to remind others they can stand too. That evening, neighborhood children began gathering in Pearl's backyard after word spread that Jackie Chan was staying there. Jack found himself teaching basic self-defense moves to a dozen eager kids, their laughter echoing through the gathering dusk. "You see," Pearl said, watching from her kitchen window, "you're not just defending yourself anymore. You're showing them what's possible." Jack realized she was right. He couldn't be a passive defendant in Romano's narrative. He needed to actively fight the corruption that had turned him from hero into hunted man. Monica worked 18-hour days from Pearl's dining room, transforming it into a war room with legal documents covering every surface. While she built their case, Jack used his unique skills for reconnaissance that no traditional investigator could match. Their research revealed a disturbing pattern spanning 5 years. Romano's officers consistently targeted elderly minorities in gentrifying neighborhoods, always claiming suspicious behavior or matching descriptions of fictional suspects. The harassment followed a geographic pattern, areas where property values were rising, but longtime residents remained. Jack's film industry connections proved invaluable when Beverly Martinez joined their team. The former investigative journalist had been fired for exposing police corruption that implicated major advertisers, but her sources remained loyal. "Romano isn't just a corrupt cop," Beverly explained, spreading surveillance photos across Pearl's kitchen table. "He's the muscle for a real estate conspiracy." The photographs showed Romano meeting with City Councilman Arthur Brennan at the exclusive Grosse Pointe Country Club. Cash changed hands in parking lots. Property deeds transferred to shell companies. The pattern was clear: target communities, harass residents into moving, buy properties below market value. Jack's acrobatic abilities allowed access to vantage points no conventional surveillance could reach. From fire escapes and rooftops, he photographed meetings, recorded conversations using Beverly's long-range equipment, documented the conspiracy's scope. Walter, despite his injuries, became their community liaison. His veteran status gave him credibility with neighbors who'd suffered Romano's harassment but feared speaking out. One by one, they came forward with their stories. Mrs. Henderson, 83, whose son was arrested on fabricated drug charges after refusing to sell her family home. Mr. Kowalski, no relation to the officer, whose corner grocery was raided monthly on anonymous tips that never produced evidence. The Patterson family, whose teenager was beaten during a traffic stop that occurred while walking to school. Monica documented each case, building a federal civil rights complaint that revealed systematic violation of constitutional protections. But they needed more than testimony. "We need Romano's financial records," Beverly said, "something that proves the money trail." Jack studied the building blueprints Beverly had obtained through her sources. Detroit Police Headquarters, 30-year-old. Construction, standard security systems, predictable patrol schedules. "I can get inside," he said quietly. "But if I'm caught, then we're all finished," Monica replied. "But if we don't try, Romano wins." Romano's media blitz intensified like a coordinated military campaign. Fox News led with Foreign Martial Arts expert assaults police, featuring grainy cell phone footage edited to show only Jack's defensive movements. stripped of context. Breitbart ran a piece titled Antifa's Secret Weapon Revealed, questioning his immigration status despite decades of legal citizenship. Romano himself appeared on 3 different talk radio shows within 24 hours, his voice dripping with false patriotism as he spoke about foreign agitators who hate American law enforcement. He questioned Jack's motives, his background, even his right to be in the country. Beverly fought back through alternative media channels, but her resources were limited. She secured an exclusive interview with Walter, who spoke with quiet dignity about his military service and the brutal attack he'd survived. "I served 2 tours in Vietnam," Walter said, looking directly into the camera. "I've seen real enemies of America. This man who helped me, he's not one of them." Monica organized a community press conference on the steps of Detroit City Hall. Jack was reluctant to speak publicly, knowing it would make him an even bigger target, but Pearl convinced him that silence would allow Romano to control the narrative completely. "Sometimes you have to step into the light to cast out the darkness," she said. The press conference drew hundreds of supporters, kids Jack had been training, community members who'd suffered Romano's harassment, veterans who stood with Walter. Jack spoke with characteristic humility, thanking the community for their support and emphasizing that he'd only wanted to help an injured man. "I am an American citizen," he said simply. "I believe in justice for all people." Romano staged a counter-demonstration, with off-duty officers and their supporters, creating a tense confrontation that threatened to turn violent. The 2 crowds faced each other across the plaza, separated by a thin line of neutral police officers who looked increasingly uncomfortable. The breaking point came when Romano's supporters began shouting racial slurs at Jack and Walter. Beverly's cameras captured everything. Grown men in police union shirts screaming, "Go back to China," at a naturalized citizen, calling a decorated veteran a criminal thug. Public opinion began shifting as Romano's true nature became visible. The contrast was stark. Jack's supporters diverse and peaceful, Romano's crowd angry and hateful. That evening, Romano met privately with Arthur Brennan at an upscale restaurant. Their conversation recorded by Jack from his perch in the building's ventilation system. "This Asian problem needs a permanent solution," Romano said, cutting into his steak. The call came at dawn. Tactical units were surrounding the Riverside Community Center, where Jack taught morning classes to neighborhood kids. Beverly's police scanner crackled with coded communications as Romano deployed overwhelming force to arrest one unarmed janitor. Jack spotted the surveillance from 3 blocks away, recognizing the coordinated positions that meant serious trouble. Every instinct told him to run, but 20 children were already inside the gymnasium, expecting their lesson. He wouldn't abandon them to Romano's revenge. The SWAT team stormed the building like they were raiding a terrorist cell. Flashbang grenades, automatic weapons, tactical gear designed for warfare. But they found their target protecting children with playground equipment that Jack's defensive choreography was pure poetry adapted to mortal stakes. Basketball hoops became swinging platforms. Gymnastics mats transformed into shields. Rope climbing equipment provided aerial advantage. He turned children's games into escape routes. Duck Duck Goose became an evasion pattern. Playground slides became emergency exits. Using the school's PA system, he coordinated with Beverly, who was filming from across the street. "Fire drill," he announced calmly. "Everyone follow Miss Sarah to the kitchen door." The tactical officers found themselves chasing shadows through a maze of athletic equipment. Jack used his knowledge of the building's layout, leading pursuers through dead ends while shepherding kids to safety via the cafeteria. Water sprinklers activated when Jack triggered the fire alarm, turning floors slippery and sight lines unclear. Emergency lighting created dramatic shadows as he moved like a ghost through the chaos, never raising a hand against the officers, but neutralizing their tactical advantage completely. His escape came through the ventilation system, a route no one expected a man his age to navigate. He emerged in the adjacent apartment building as Romano arrived to find an empty gymnasium, wet floors, and no arrests. Media footage showed heavily armed tactical teams invading a children's activity center, making Romano look like a tyrant using military force against civilians. The optics were devastating. 20-plus armed officers couldn't capture one unarmed janitor who'd been protecting kids. Jack watched the news coverage from a new hiding spot, officially a fugitive but with public sympathy firmly on his side. Romano's overreach had backfired spectacularly, but it also meant the stakes had escalated beyond anything Jack had imagined. The hunt was now a war, and Romano held all the official advantages. The knock on Pearl's door came at midnight, soft, respectful, but insistent. Jack peered through the curtains to see a gray-haired man in civilian clothes, hands visible and unthreatening. Despite every instinct screaming danger, something about the visitor's bearing suggested former military or law enforcement. Frank DeMarco stepped inside carefully, his weathered face showing the strain of 30 years on Detroit streets. At 62, the retired lieutenant moved with the careful dignity of someone who'd kept his integrity intact despite decades of corruption around him. "I've been investigating Romano for 3 years," he said without preamble, settling into Pearl's living room chair. "You've given me the platform I needed to finally act." DeMarco's files filled 2 bankers' boxes, photographs, financial records, witness statements from honest officers forced out of the department. Romano's corruption ran deeper than anyone suspected, protected by a network of union officials, political allies, and financial backers who saw police power as a tool for intimidation. "He's been skimming from the police pension fund," DeMarco explained, spreading financial documents across Pearl's coffee table. "Using that money to pay informants in minority communities, fund harassment campaigns, even purchase weapons for off-the-books operations." The most chilling revelation was Romano's connection to organized white supremacist groups. Not just sympathetic, actively collaborating. Police intelligence was being shared with hate groups. Training facilities were being used for private militia exercises. Badge numbers were being provided to intimidate witnesses. "But here's what will destroy him," DeMarco continued, producing a handwritten ledger. "Romano's been documenting everything in his personal journal. Names, dates, amounts. He thinks it protects him from his allies turning on him." Monica studied the evidence with a prosecutor's eye. "This is enough for federal RICO charges. Conspiracy, racketeering, civil rights violations under color of law." Walter leaned forward despite his injuries. "What do you need from us?" DeMarco's expression grew grim. "Romano keeps the original journal in his office safe. We need the actual documents, not copies. His lawyers will claim anything else is fabricated." Jack looked up from the building blueprints DeMarco had provided. "You want me to break into police headquarters?" "I want Romano stopped before he kills someone," DeMarco replied. "You've already proven his officers can't touch you. But this time, if you're caught." The unspoken ending hung in the air. Capture meant death, disguised as resisting arrest or suicide in custody. Midnight descended over Detroit police headquarters like a shroud, the building's Art Deco facade casting long shadows across the empty plaza. Jack approached from the north, using construction equipment from a nearby renovation project to access the roof undetected. Romano had installed additional surveillance since Jack became a fugitive: motion sensors, upgraded cameras, roving patrols. But the building's 1970s architecture provided weaknesses that no security upgrade could eliminate completely. Jack moved through shadows with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent decades turning environments into allies. Fire escapes became ladders, window ledges became highways, ventilation systems became secret passages. Each movement was calculated, precise, leaving no trace of his passage. The office lay on the 4th floor, Romano's personal domain filled with the trappings of corrupted authority. Jack bypassed the electronic lock using techniques learned from professional stunt coordinators who'd taught him to make impossible entrances look effortless. Inside, Romano's true character was revealed. In shocking detail, white supremacist literature lined the bookshelves, not hidden, but displayed like trophies. Photographs showed Romano with known hate group leaders at private gatherings. A wall map of Detroit marked minority-owned businesses with red X's, like targets in a shooting gallery. Jack photographed everything while DeMarco monitored security from outside via encrypted radio. The financial records were damning. Pension fund theft documented with accountant's precision, payments to informants listed by neighborhood and ethnicity, weapons purchases that exceeded departmental budgets. But the journal was the prize. Romano's personal handwriting detailed plans to frame community leaders as criminals, eliminate troublemakers through fabricated charges, and use police intelligence to help his supremacist allies target activists. The hit list made Jack's blood run cold. Walter's name appeared third, Monica's was seventh, and at the very top, circled in red ink, Jack Chun, permanent solution required. Jack photographed page after page, each entry revealing deeper levels of corruption and hatred. Romano had documented his own crimes with meticulous detail, creating an unshakable case for federal prosecution. The silent alarm triggered when Jack shifted position near the desk, a motion sensor he'd missed in his initial reconnaissance. Security lights flooded the hallway as DeMarco's urgent voice crackled through the radio. Company coming. 3 guards, main stairwell. You've got maybe 90 seconds. Jack pocketed the camera and moved toward the window, but footsteps echoed. In the corridor outside, Romano's voice carried through the walls. He'd been working late, paranoid about security breaches. The trap was closing around him. Romano's retaliation was swift and merciless. Monica was arrested at her grandmother's house at 5 a.m., handcuffed in her pajamas while neighbors watched in shock. The charges were fabricated but legally sophisticated: obstruction of justice, harboring a fugitive, conspiracy to incite violence. No bail pending federal review. The judge announced with mechanical precision, his decision clearly predetermined. Monica's legal expertise meant nothing when the system itself was corrupted from within. By noon, Romano held a press conference outside the courthouse, Monica's perp walk playing on every local news station. We have neutralized the terrorist support network, he declared with false gravitas. But the foreign agitator remains at large, armed and extremely dangerous. His ultimatum was delivered with theatrical precision. Jack had 24 hours to surrender, or Monica would face maximum federal penalties, life in prison for helping a friend. No deals, no negotiations. The community responded with the largest protest in Detroit's recent history. Pearl Williams led the march despite her recent heart episode, her walker decorated with civil rights buttons from 6 decades of activism. Hundreds of supporters surrounded the courthouse, chanting for justice and carrying signs with Jack's photo. But Romano had locked down the legal system through corrupt judges and prosecutors. Federal contacts were delaying Justice Department oversight. Media allies were spreading counter-narratives about cop-killing terrorists and foreign agitators. DeMarco tried to warn Jack about the trap, but the phone lines were monitored. Beverly's news reports were being suppressed by station managers who feared losing police cooperation. Walter, still recovering from his beating, could only watch helplessly as Romano's machine crushed anyone who opposed him. Jack faced an impossible choice from his hiding place in an abandoned warehouse: surrender and likely be killed in custody, branded as a terrorist who died resisting arrest, or stay free while Monica faced decades in maximum security prison where accidents happened to high-profile inmates. The television showed Monica being led into the federal detention center, her dignity intact despite the orange jumpsuit and shackles. She looked directly into the camera, mouthing words Jack could read on her lips. Don't do it. But honor wouldn't let him sacrifice an innocent woman for his freedom. Romano had found the one weapon Jack couldn't fight: his own conscience. That evening, Jack called Romano directly, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. I will surrender. Tomorrow at noon, police headquarters. You release Monica first. Romano's laughter was cold as winter steel. You'll surrender when and where I say, Jackie. And the lawyer stays exactly where she is. Jack arrived at Detroit Police Headquarters exactly at noon, walking through the crowd of supporters with quiet dignity that reminded everyone why they'd rallied to his cause. News crews from across the country had gathered to witness either justice or martyrdom. No one was certain which. Romano greeted him with a politician's smile for the cameras, his handshake firm and false. Mr. Chan, thank you for doing the right thing. The words dripped with mock sincerity while his eyes promised violence. Jack submitted to the search and handcuffing without resistance, maintaining his composure as Romano led him toward the building's entrance. The crowd pressed against police barriers, sensing something was wrong despite the choreographed civility. Where's Monica? Jack asked as they passed through the lobby. Romano's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the predator beneath. The lawyer is exactly where she belongs. And soon, you'll be joining her. The basement holding area reeked of fear and desperation, its fluorescent lights casting sickly shadows on concrete walls. Monica sat in the corner cell, her business suit replaced by orange detention garb, but her spirit unbroken. "You shouldn't have come," she said as Romano locked Jack in the adjacent cell. "I gave my word," Jack replied simply. Romano dismissed the guards with practiced authority, leaving only his most trusted allies, Sergeant Rick Castellano and Detective Mike Brenner, both carrying shotguns and the dead-eyed look of men who'd crossed lines they could never uncross. "Here's what's going to happen," Romano said, drawing his service weapon with theatrical flourish. "Mr. Chan is going to hang himself in his cell, overcome with guilt about his terrorist activities. Ms. Williams will suffer a tragic accident while trying to prevent his suicide. 2 deaths, case closed." He revealed the prepared suicide note, typed on official letterhead, confessing to crimes Jack had never committed. The murder-suicide scenario would eliminate key witnesses and end the federal investigation permanently. Outside, DeMarco and Walter coordinated with Beverly Martinez, whose livestream had attracted thousands of viewers sensing impending tragedy. Federal agents were finally responding to mounting pressure, but Romano's corrupt contacts had delayed their arrival. In the basement, Jack calculated distances to heating pipes and electrical conduits, while Romano savored his approaching victory. The corrupt chief had won every battle, controlled every narrative, eliminated every threat, but he'd made one fatal mistake, underestimating the man who'd spent 50 years turning impossible situations into triumphs. The basement holding area felt like a tomb, its concrete walls sweating moisture that carried the stench of decades of fear and desperation. Jack found Monica beaten but defiant in her cell, her lawyer's composure intact despite the orange detention uniform and visible bruises. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered as Romano's footsteps echoed through the corridor. "I gave my word," Jack replied, his eyes already calculating the room's dimensions, the placement of heating pipes, the distance to electrical conduits. Romano entered with theatrical confidence, flanked by Sergeant Rick Castellano and Detective Mike Brenner. Both men carried shotguns and wore the dead-eyed expressions of killers who'd crossed too many lines to ever return to humanity. "Welcome to your final performance, Jackie," Romano sneered, drawing his service weapon. "Here's the script. You hang yourself in despair over your terrorist activities. The lawyer dies trying to stop you. Murder-suicide, case closed." He produced a typed confession on official letterhead, detailing crimes Jack had never committed. The document would provide legal justification for the executions, wrapping murder in bureaucratic legitimacy. Monica's phone had been hidden in her shoe throughout her imprisonment, recording every word. But Romano discovered it with a roar of rage, smashing the device against the concrete wall. Their only evidence of his conspiracy crumbled into electronic fragments. Jack used Romano's fury as distraction, shifting position to place himself near the heating system's exposed pipes. His movements were subtle, natural-looking, but each step positioned him for the desperate gambit that would require every skill he'd developed over 5 decades. Above them, DeMarco and Walter coordinated with Beverly Martinez, whose live stream had attracted federal attention. But Romano's corrupt contacts were delaying Justice Department intervention, buying precious time to eliminate witnesses permanently. The corrupt chief raised his weapon, ordering Jack to kneel execution style. "Any last words, movie star?" Jack's response was barely audible, but his weight was already shifting toward the balls of his feet. "Yes, you made one mistake." "What's that?" "You brought me exactly where I needed to be." Romano's finger tightened on the trigger as Jack prepared to launch into the most crucial fight of his life. Jack exploded into motion as Romano's gun fired, the bullet sparking off the heating pipe where his head had been a split second earlier. This wasn't choreographed combat. This was survival stripped down to its most primal elements. He kicked over a metal interrogation table, its surface deflecting Romano's second shot, while he rolled behind the building's massive boiler system. The basement's tight quarters and maze of pipes created a three-dimensional battlefield where agility mattered more than firepower. Kowalski and Murphy thundered down the stairs, shotguns ready, but the emergency lighting Jack had triggered by striking the electrical panel turned the basement into a nightmarish landscape of shifting shadows and echoing sounds. Jack moved like a ghost through the mechanical systems, using water pipes as swing points, electrical conduits as handholds, the building's infrastructure as his partner in a deadly dance. A shotgun blast shattered the water heater, sending scalding steam through the room and further reducing visibility. Murphy went down when Jack redirected his weapon toward the ceiling, bringing down suspended tiles and fluorescent fixtures that buried the officer harmlessly but effectively. Kowalski found himself trapped when Jack used a support beam to collapse a metal shelving unit, creating a cage of scattered equipment. Romano became increasingly desperate, firing wildly at shadows and sounds, his bullets ricocheting off pipes and concrete in dangerous patterns. His professional composure cracked as the legendary fighter systematically dismantled his advantage. "Stand still and fight like a man," Romano screamed, his voice echoing off the walls. But Jack fought like flowing water, present everywhere and nowhere, striking from unexpected angles, using Romano's rage against him. The corrupt chief exhausted his ammunition shooting at phantoms while Jack conserved energy for the final confrontation. Monica coached from her cell, whispering directions about room layout and remaining threats. Her legal mind tracked each officer's position, each weapon's status, providing tactical intelligence that supplemented Jack's instincts. The basement fell silent except for heavy breathing and the hiss of damaged pipes. Romano stood alone in the boiler room, his gun empty, surrounded by the wreckage of his ambush. Sweat poured down his face as he realized his prey had become the predator. Jack emerged from the shadows like an avenging spirit, no longer the humble janitor but the master of combat who'd spent decades perfecting the art of turning environment into weapon. Romano drew a backup revolver from his ankle holster, but his hands shook with exhaustion and fear. The basement had become his nightmare. Every shadow concealed potential attack. Every sound might be Jack's approach. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Romano snarled, backing toward the evidence room. "You're just another foreign criminal who doesn't belong here." Jack followed with predatory patience, his movements fluid despite the brutal fighting. "I'm an American citizen. This is my country too." The evidence room became their final battlefield, surrounded by confiscated weapons and boxed files that documented decades of police work. Romano grabbed a crowbar from the tool rack, swinging wildly as Jack weaved between the metal shelving units. Their combat was brutal chess, Romano's desperate strength against Jack's technical precision. The corrupt chief fought dirty, using broken glass from evidence containers, metal pipes, anything to gain advantage. But Jack maintained his principles even here, seeking to disable rather than destroy. The crucial moment came when Romano seized Monica as a human shield, pressing his revolver against her temple. One more step, and the lawyer dies. Jack faced the impossible choice every action hero eventually confronts: save the innocent without becoming the monster. His solution demonstrated why legends transcend mere fighting ability. Using the reflection in a metal evidence locker, Jack caught the room's single overhead light and redirected it into Romano's eyes. The momentary blindness created the opening he needed to free Monica without harming anyone, a move requiring perfect timing and absolute trust in his abilities that DeMarco's voice echoed from the stairwell as honest officers finally overrode Romano's. "Lockdown. Federal agents are here. It's over, Romano." But the corrupt chief had one final card to play. Throughout their battle, Jack had been wearing the body camera DeMarco provided, automatically uploading everything to cloud storage. Romano's confessions, his threats, his attempted murders, all recorded and broadcast live to thousands of viewers. "You filmed everything," Romano whispered, his face draining of color. Jack nodded quietly. Truth has a way of surviving, even in darkness. Romano's empire was crumbling in real time as his crimes played on screens across the nation. Federal agents were arresting his co-conspirators based on live evidence. His political protectors were abandoning him to save themselves. The man who'd thought himself untouchable discovered that justice, delayed, could still arrive with devastating force. Romano's final desperation peaked as he realized his confessions were being broadcast to the world. Federal agents filled the building above while his criminal empire collapsed in real time. Co-conspirators arrested, bank accounts frozen, political allies fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. 20 years I built this, he screamed, firing his remaining bullets at the ceiling-mounted camera equipment. "You foreign piece of garbage." Jack used Romano's upward shots as the opportunity he'd been waiting for, closing the distance with a fluid movement that turned the chief's own momentum against him. Romano's collision with the concrete wall was entirely his own doing. Jack had simply guided the inevitable outcome. The corrupt chief attempted one final attack, wrapping an electrical cord around Jack's throat in a desperate stranglehold. But Jack transformed the assault into a submission hold that neutralized Romano without permanent harm, demonstrating the principle that had guided his entire career: use the opponent's energy against them. Monica freed herself from the damaged cell, immediately calling federal agents using the building's landline. Her legal training took over as she began documenting the crime scene, ensuring every piece of evidence would be admissible in court. Honest officers led by DeMarco secured the building level by level, arresting Romano's corrupt allies who'd thought themselves protected by badges and brotherhood. The blue wall of silence cracked as officers chose justice over loyalty to corruption. Beverly Martinez entered with news cameras, broadcasting live as Romano was handcuffed by his own subordinates. The irony wasn't lost on viewers nationwide. The man who'd abused police authority was now subject to it himself, that Romano's final attempt to claim victimhood backfired spectacularly. Multiple camera angles showed him as the aggressor throughout the basement confrontation, while Jack's restraint and defensive actions supported every element of his character testimony. Walter arrived with community leaders, his presence providing moral authority that validated Jack's heroic intentions from the beginning. The beaten veteran's forgiveness toward his attackers contrasted sharply with Romano's continued hatred and defiance. Federal evidence teams began cataloging Romano's financial records, finding millions stolen from police pensions and traced to white supremacist organizations. The conspiracy's scope exceeded even DeMarco's estimates, a systematic betrayal of public trust for personal gain and ideological hatred. A.S. Romano was led away in federal custody. His final words were curses in multiple languages, proving that hatred recognized no boundaries. But justice had prevailed through the courage of individuals who refused to accept corruption as inevitable. The basement that had been designed as Jack's tomb became Romano's downfall. Federal investigators moved with surgical precision through Romano's criminal empire, following money trails that led to shocking revelations. The pension fund theft totaled over $8 million across 5 years, money systematically funneled to white supremacist organizations and Romano's personal accounts in offshore banks. Arthur Brennan was arrested during a city council meeting, while attempting to flee with a suitcase containing $400,000 in cash. His real estate fraud scheme had displaced dozens of families, elderly residents harassed from homes their families had owned for generations. Kowalski and Murphy, faced with federal conspiracy charges carrying life sentences, provided detailed testimony about Romano's criminal orders in exchange for reduced prison terms. Their cooperation revealed additional victims across Detroit's neighborhoods, elderly residents terrorized into selling homes below market value, minority business owners driven out through fabricated violations. The scope of systematic oppression was staggering. Mrs. Henderson's son, imprisoned on planted drug evidence. The Patterson family's teenager, hospitalized after a routine traffic stop. Mr. Kowalski's corner grocery, raided monthly until forced into bankruptcy. Dozens of families destroyed to feed Romano's greed and hatred. That Jack's federal charges evaporated as prosecutors reviewed the overwhelming evidence. The Justice Department issued a public apology for the initial persecution, acknowledging that Jack had acted heroically to protect an assault victim and expose systematic corruption. Monica's fabricated charges were dismissed with prejudice, meaning they could never be refiled. Her civil rights lawsuit expanded into class action status, representing every victim of Romano's conspiracy. Settlement negotiations began at $50 million, with additional federal oversight of Detroit's police department. Walter's recovery amazed his doctors, who attributed his resilience to military conditioning and unprecedented community support. Pearl Williams was released from the hospital, declaring their neighborhood stronger than ever, due to the crisis that had united formerly isolated residents. Beverly Martinez won the Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism. Her Romano expose becoming a textbook case study in how systematic corruption could be defeated through persistent reporting and community organizing. Major networks competed to hire her for national positions. The community center that had been Romano's target became a symbol of resistance. Children Jack had taught during those terrifying weeks returned with their parents, eager to continue learning about dignity, respect, and standing up for justice. DeMarco's appointment as interim police chief brought immediate reforms that transformed Detroit's law enforcement culture. Mandatory bias training replaced Romano's hate-filled briefings. Community oversight boards gained real power to investigate misconduct. Body cameras became standard equipment, not optional accessories. The corruption reporting system DeMarco implemented allowed honest officers to expose wrongdoing without fear of retaliation. Within months, a dozen problematic officers were terminated or transferred, replaced by recruits who viewed police work as public service rather than personal power. Jack was honored by Detroit's city council, but characteristically deflected praise to the community members who'd supported the fight for justice. Using donations from across the country, he established the Walter Jenkins Community Center in the veterans' honor, featuring programs that went far beyond martial arts. The center became a neighborhood hub offering homework help for struggling students, job training for unemployed adults, community gardens that turned vacant lots into green spaces, and senior citizen support programs that ensured no elderly resident faced isolation again. Walter embraced his role as assistant instructor. Despite his age, sharing military discipline and leadership skills with young people who'd never encountered positive male role models. His Thursday chess games expanded into tournaments that drew competitors from across the city, creating friendships that crossed racial and economic boundaries. Monica opened her legal clinic in the same building, providing free representation to victims of police misconduct nationwide. Her success with the Romano case established precedents that other lawyers used to fight systematic corruption in dozens of cities. Jack returned to janitorial work by personal choice, finding deep satisfaction in honest labor and humble service. His modest apartment became an informal community center where children sought mentorship, adults requested advice, and seniors enjoyed companionship. The transformation was remarkable, but not magical. Real change required daily commitment from ordinary people choosing to build something better than what they'd inherited. Jack's intervention had provided the spark, but the community's sustained effort created lasting improvement. Evening classes at the center emphasized Jack's philosophy. True strength comes from helping others. Genuine victory requires no defeated enemies. Children who'd witnessed police brutality learned that authority without accountability was tyranny, but justice was possible when good people refused to accept corruption as inevitable. The neighborhood that had been Romano's hunting ground became a model for community police cooperation. 6 months after Romano's arrest, Detroit's Corktown neighborhood was unrecognizable from the scene of Walter's beating. The community center bustled with activity that spilled onto surrounding streets. Martial arts demonstrations, legal clinics, senior programs, youth mentoring that created bonds across generational divides. Jack's classes had evolved beyond simple self-defense into comprehensive character development. Students learned that physical technique meant nothing without moral foundation, that real martial artists protected others rather than seeking dominance. His philosophy resonated with children who'd seen too much violence, offering alternative paths to strength and respect. Walter's full recovery defied medical predictions, his resilience becoming legendary among staff and patients. He served as the center's unofficial historian, sharing stories of military service and civil rights struggles that connected current challenges to broader movements for justice and equality. Monica's legal clinic had processed over 200 cases, recovering millions in settlements for Romano's victims, while establishing precedents that strengthened federal oversight of police departments nationwide. Her success inspired law students from universities across the Midwest to volunteer their time and skills. Beverly Martinez's investigative series had sparked police reforms in dozens of cities, the Romano case becoming a template for exposing systematic corruption. Her new position with a major network provided the resources needed to investigate similar conspiracies in other communities. Former officers Kowalski and Murphy completed court-ordered community service at the center, beginning to understand the human cost of their participation in Romano's crimes. Their transformation wasn't complete, but interaction with people they'd once harassed opened their eyes to perspectives they'd never considered. DeMarco's police reforms were showing measurable results. Complaint rates down 60%. Community trust surveys improving monthly. Diverse recruitment bringing fresh perspectives to a department that had been poisoned by decades of Romano's influence. The center hosted its first annual celebration, marking the anniversary of the incident. That changed everything. Speakers emphasized how individual courage could inspire collective transformation, but also how sustained community effort was required to create lasting change. Jack watched children demonstrate martial arts techniques for gathered families. Their movements precise, but their emphasis clearly on discipline, respect, and protection of others. These young people would grow up understanding that true strength served justice, not personal ambition. The work was far from finished, but the foundation was solid. 1 year later, Jack walked the same Riverside Avenue route where everything had begun, but the neighborhood had transformed beyond recognition. The memorial plaque honoring Walter's courage and Jack's intervention was surrounded by community gardens where vacant lots once stood, new businesses owned by residents Romano had tried to drive away. Police officers walked regular beats, knowing residents by name rather than viewing them as potential threats. The relationship wasn't perfect, but it was built on mutual respect rather than fear and suspicion. DeMarco's reforms had created accountability that made both citizens and officers safer. Children Jack had taught demonstrated martial arts at outdoor tables, where Walter now played chess with former adversaries who'd learned to see beyond racial prejudices. The games drew crowds of spectators who discovered that competition could build community rather than divide it. Monica announced her legal clinic's expansion to 12 other cities, using Detroit's success as a model for fighting systematic police corruption nationwide. Federal oversight had become the standard response to departments with Romano-style problems, preventing future conspiracies before they could take root. Beverly Martinez reported on the anniversary story, highlighting how grassroots organizing, combined with individual heroism, could overcome entrenched corruption. Her continued investigation had exposed similar networks in other cities, proving Romano's methods weren't unique to Detroit. Jack reflected on his journey from reluctant witness to community leader, understanding that true heroism wasn't about fighting abilities, but about willingness to stand up for principle regardless of personal cost. The humble janitor had found purpose beyond his wildest Hollywood dreams. Romano was serving 25 years in federal prison, his corrupt network dismantled, pension funds recovered and restored to the officers he'd betrayed. His appeals were consistently denied as new evidence of his crimes continued surfacing from ongoing investigations. Jack returned to his simple janitorial work, content with quiet service that provided dignity without demanding recognition. The community center operated successfully under Walter and Monica's leadership, its programs expanding to serve neighboring areas that requested similar support. As Jack helped an elderly woman cross the same street where Walter had been beaten. The small act of kindness continued the cycle of community care that had grown from one moment of choosing courage over safety. The neighborhood children who trailed behind him represented hope, a generation that would grow up understanding justice was possible when good people refused to look away from injustice. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.